Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today, I am joined by Billy Mays III, guitarist and musician known as Infinite Third. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Hello, sir.
It's been a while since we talked, actually.
I know.
Voice to voice. It's been a little while. Today, it is snowing where you are. The last we saw each other, it was still pretty nice. It was, I guess late September, early October. So the weather was pretty beautiful out that day.
Yeah.
We are here to talk about Gently, which, correct me if I'm wrong, your first album, your first instrumental release, right?
It's my first official release. Yeah.
Gotcha. So let's set the scene. Tell us about where you were in life, what was going on, how you were developing as a musician, or all of the circumstances that led up to creating, writing, recording the album.
Yeah. It's kind of like my origin story. So I share a version of it quite a lot, but I'll try to give you the lead up and, the important details. But I say it's my first official release because I was making music for years and years before this. I can remember making quote unquote albums in like 2002 as a high schooler with a guitar and a distortion pedal and some like drum pads and an 8-track recorder, like a digital recorder.
Love it. Yeah, we all did that, right?
Yeah, and that was like my life in high school. And the only person that ever really got to hear the stuff was my mom, and she loved it, even though it was like abrasive, like, I was listening to nu metal, System of a Down and stuff like that at the time. So it kind of had that little bit of metal flavor, but like my own little version of it because I had no idea what I was doing. And I still have some of those recordings, very few of them left, but like files that I was able to salvage from CDRs and stuff like that. And by the time I got to college in 2005, I was a little bit better and I was like formulating mixes still on the same equipment. And there actually is a release, but it wasn't really released at the time because there wasn't really a way to release music like that. I think I had some of the songs up on MySpace back in the day.
Sure. I think the platforms for putting music out as an independent artist at the time were Pure Volume and MySpace, if we're talking 2005 era.
Yes. And then a couple years later, of course, like Gently, this album that we're talking about kind of just coincides with Bandcamp and being able to like have access to distribution to the streaming services that are like the early, or not even the streaming service. What am I saying? It's like iTunes,
right?
You can get on iTunes basically. So, I'm like I said, I'm making this sort of melodic metal type thing up until 2009 because in February of 2009, February 22nd, 2/22/09, I was in an apartment fire. And I escaped the apartment fire. It was in the middle of the night. It was around 3 a.m. Somebody came to my door and I somehow heard them, ran to the door, and they were like, "Hey, the building's on fire. You got to get out." And I rushed to pick up like my phone and wallet and keys. And by the time I get back to the front door, the entire staircase is covered in flames. But my neighbor who woke me up had a fire extinguisher, and he puts it out real quick, and I'm able to squeeze by the flames just enough to get to the outside. And by the time I turn around, my entire apartment is in flames. Like if I would have been sleeping still, I would have been dead for sure. But I got out of that kind of unscathed, except I lost everything I owned. And that was like the turning point of my music, my life was basically, what am I going to do after this? How am I ever going to make music again? Like all my years gone, everything I've made is gone. and that's just on the music side. There's all kinds of memorabilia that was lost. But I say all this to say that thankfully I was able to get somewhat back on my feet with music with the help of my dad, who I think he just got me like a pretty decent like Stratocaster guitar, which I had never had before, and a little practice amp. And with those two things, I slowly started playing guitar again. And what I noticed was I was not playing metal. I was like traumatized. And for some reason, what was coming out was very, I don't know, it was just more emotionally tapped into what I was going through at the time. And that's to say it was a little bit hopeful at the same time. Like, it wasn't dark. It was sad, but there was a little bit of optimism in it, because I was kind of like at this point of like, you can't go lower, you know? So that was the moment. Like, when I started playing with that Stratocaster and the practice amp, I would say like what I was doing then was basically the beginning of this Gently album. And I think I ended up with a new laptop eventually, and I was able to start demoing some songs. And I think I ended up with three demos that were eventually those songs made it onto the album. I think it was track 3, To Circle the Drain, track 5, and I think it was like 3, 4, 5, maybe. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but there was like a very clear 3-song demo that came from it. And the second part of the origin story, like the second big part, is that a few months later, after I had that demo ready of 3 songs, I moved into a new apartment. I sort of got a few more pieces of gear that I needed. And then right around June 28th, to be exact, my dad died suddenly. And that was like the big hit. You know, it was
as if a fire hadn't been enough, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I like to say this sometimes because it feels very true, and I'm still kind of like processing it to this day, and that losing a parent is kind of natural when it's something that we all go through. Well, some of us go through, and there's something about a fire that's just so chaotic, and like there's no explanation for it. Speaking of, the fire turned out to be arson. Someone burned down the building because they had gotten evicted from the apartment that I had moved into. It was the guy, he had lived there for like 12 years, and I guess he was unhinged, and they saw him circling around the parking lot in the days before.
I don't think I've heard that part of the story before.
Yeah, it's messed up, and it kind of messes with you. Like, I remember my dad at the time thought that someone had targeted him, you know, because we have the same name, and they might have seen his name in the mail or something. And thankfully that was not the case, but it kind of added another level of like heinousness to the whole thing. And it was just like, I wasn't the only one. There were probably 20 to 30 apartments that were all gone. It was just like a very sad occasion. Thankfully, nobody got seriously hurt, except I remember a dog got a piece of the roof fell on a dog and kind of burned its fur, and it seemed like it was limping, but it survived. But yeah, so that, I would say after my dad died, it was, I had sort of stopped with music again, or not again. Like, this time it was a different reason. It was grief. I was just kind of frozen.
You go through these 2 events, you begin to play again. You're working off of the 3-song demos that you have and build out the rest of the album. What happens next? You're looking to put it out. I know that you're present on Bandcamp. Obviously, you're now on Spotify. I'm not sure that was a service in 2009, but what were you doing as a musician, like a performer in any way? What was the promotion like around the album? What did you have available to you at that point in time as as a promoter of your work or as a musician in general?
Okay, I guess to fully understand like why this even came about might be helpful to know that at the time my dad died in June, I had sort of it was a weird influx of attention that I got because he was, a famous guy, and it was almost like I got a whole influx of Twitter followers and just people wanting to support. So it was a weird kind of side effect of the whole thing was I was sort of grieving publicly. And I think that in hindsight, by the time I got to November of that year and the album was done, I think it was almost like, well, I mean, there's this little audience here. I think I should just release it and figure out what that looks like. And then as far as the tools that I had at the time, I think it was kind of you would use a service like CD Baby or what's the other one? TuneCore.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly can't even remember which one I was using at the time. So I do remember like the entirety of the plan was I'm going to print CDs, like professionally print CDs, and I'm going to put it on iTunes. Like that was it. I didn't know anything about if there was supposed to be some kind of press around it. Like in my eyes, it was, I'll just put it out on and tell them it's out on Twitter and hope that everyone listens to it. And, I learned all the worst lessons about my expectations about music in that moment.
Well, you got to do the first one, right?
Yes, exactly. And I'm realizing that I kind of glossed over now that we're this far ahead. I guess it would be important to say that. So June happens. Like I said, I was kind of frozen creatively for about 2 months, I would say. And a really random thing happened. My dad had helped someone out that he didn't even know. She owns a retreat center in California, and it's called the Ashram. And because he helped her out and like did something generous for her along with one of his business partners, she said she had extended the invitation, like, you have a free stay, a week-long stay at our retreat on the house anytime you want. And this place is expensive. It was like where Oprah goes. It's this high-end Hollywood retreat center where they feed you, they just like you work out all day and they massage you and yoga and all this stuff. And I guess at some point in the 2 or 3 months after he died, she found out about my existence and said, hey, that invitation can just extend to you if you would like to come. And so I went to California for a week, and I was kind of just at a low point, and I was not feeling healthy or anything. And I went through this whole process that was insane. It was, you wake up every day at 5 a.m. and they take you to the mountains and you hike for 10 miles. And then you come back and they feed you raw food, like healthy food. And then you have a whole afternoon of yoga and exercise classes, and then a swimming pool with exercise and like volleyball. And then everyone every day gets a massage. And then you're in bed by like 8 o'clock, and then you do it again the next day. It was something that I'll never experience again, probably, because I don't have that kind of money. But it was why I bring this up is that I'll always remember the exact moment that like music came back to me. And it was one of the hikes. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 of the hikes where they would be silent for about half of them. It would say, we're going to take the whole first half of this hike and it's just silent, no talking to each other or anything. And it's just enjoy it. And I think it was the first silent hike. Instead of thoughts and normal thoughts, I actually just, all that music that I was writing for those demos earlier kind of just came back, and like it was almost like I opened a book and the bookmark was in it, and I just went right back to it. And it was like ideas that I had then kind of just came back, and they were just fully formed, and I was going through them in my head. So the whole rest of that time I was writing those songs in my head. And then, to make a long story short, I get home back to Florida after the retreat, and I woke up every day and started tracking and mixing these songs. And I would say from about September, October till mid-November, I had the entire album finished. And it was totally done on the fly. Like I was using Pro Tools, which I wasn't hugely experienced with. And I was programming drums, which I had almost never done. And it all just kind of, it was almost like it was just going to happen no matter what I did. And whatever it was going to be, it was going to be. And it was pure therapy. It was like the whole time I felt like I just had to do it. So we get to December, or I guess probably end of November, Thanksgiving. That was when I start thinking about, what am I going to do with this? And it was almost like, I think I had a bit of urgency around it. Like maybe afraid that I was just going to die before it came out or something. Because at this point, everything was so fragile that I think I was just like, I got to get it out before the end of the year. And I think that's where we ended up with the iTunes thing, because you can get it out pretty quick. And then I think the CDs came either right at the end of the year or right at the beginning of January. And that's the whole, like, that's it. It's just, it still blows my mind that I didn't even know that it would require spreading the word. Like, it feels kind of naive completely.
Well, you know, the thing about, I think, when you're doing your first album is that you're, you know, to use the expression, you're kind of building the plane in flight. You're discovering that there's all these mechanisms at play that while you're in the studio, while you're recording and writing, you know, it's not really even a factor in your mind. You're like, I want to compose and document this work. As soon as you're done with that, then it becomes this other scenario. It's like, well, I would like people to hear this. You know, I would like to timestamp the release of this work. So, have had very similar experiences with bands in the past and things like that, in terms of releases. Let's fast forward a little bit to now, because you're you have put out or made available the opportunity to get the album on vinyl. Where did this come from? Why did you choose to do it now? 15 years is a good landmark, though perhaps not a typical one that we might see celebrated. That's okay. This is what you've chosen to do. Mm-hmm. You have other vinyl out, but why this one now? And how is it coming along?
Yeah, that's a good point. 15 years, it does seem kind of just random. And I will say that I think that around 5-year anniversary of Gently, I had envisioned, is it possible to do a vinyl release? And at the time, there wasn't really these services that could help you with the pre-funding and all that. And so I think that it kind of comes down to the same feeling for me of, I always kind of have these cycles of everything's unknown. I should just do what feels right now, because that's the time to do it. And I think it's almost the same as that time 15 years ago, where it was like, well, I don't know if I'll make it to the 20-year anniversary, so I think I should just do it. And it just so happens that this service called Digger's Factory came across my radar because another friend released a record that way. And it's basically just a crowdfund service specifically for vinyl, where you build a whole campaign and they press it once you reach the goal and they send it out, and it's all kind of easily done. And I ordered my friend's record, and I was like, that was actually a pretty great experience. I should look into that. And as I did, I was like, okay, it's time. Let's just do it. And I also decided to wait. The actual 15-year anniversary was about a month ago. Sure. In December. of 2024. But I made the decision, I think sometime in early November, where I did the math and I was like, I don't want anybody thinking that they're buying this as a Christmas present and it's going to make it there in time, because this is like a months long process.
Fair and reasonable.
Yeah. So that's where we're at right now. We're about a quarter of the way to the goal right now. And, I'm just slowly, I also feel like maybe this is just me. I feel that it's hard to just relentlessly promote something at this time. I don't want to say at this time, but with like political things going on and tragic events going on, like it sometimes feels like I need to be aware of the waves of people's attention and like, what they feel they have the capacity for. So I'm just trying to read that. So I'll put out the word for about a couple of days and I'll kind of stop completely and you won't hear about it. And I'm kind of like trying to figure out when the next time I'll pop up. And then as soon as I pop up is usually when I get a few more orders and kind of understand right now how that all works.
A couple of things I would add, it's the 15th anniversary all year, right? The next part of that is that people have the capacity to focus on any number of things. And also, given whatever they might be getting their attention drawn to for one reason or another, does not necessarily mean that they don't want their attention drawn towards something that is celebratory and that speaks to them on the artistic wavelength. So I wouldn't say that you need to be concerned with anything else that's happening. Obviously you don't want to just like endlessly shill something, but at the same time, if no one has heard about it, then it's the first time for them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I do kind of have a way of projecting onto the general public my own, fears and insecurities around this kind of thing. And I tend to be wrong about that. And the things that surprise me are like the thing I thought would get no attention kind of blows up. And the thing I'm really pushing at one time, I realized was like the complete wrong time to be going after that one thing. So I sort of second guess sometimes, and I'm not ashamed to say it. That's just how it is.
Well, luckily, we can be wrong so often, and makes those occasional moments of correctness all the sweeter.
Yeah.
Let's hear from you about now, because I assume you've had to do a little bit of maybe remastering, remixing for vinyl on the album. So you've maybe revisited the audio. Is that correct or no?
Well, in a way, I'm not going to do too much, because when I had this made, even just for CD, I forgot to mention that I did randomly find a mastering engineer online named Nathan James, and he was like Arizona based or something. I have no idea how I found him, but something just drew me to the website and I hit him up. I paid him. I don't even remember how much, but he basically took my mixes that were very not perfect, and they're still not perfect. Like the mixes are just what they are. And he made it much more glued together and consistent. And there's only so much you can do with any given mix on the mastering side. And so I think, from what I understand, I've done some analysis on the waveforms and stuff. I think they're going to be pretty okay to just pretty much the waves to go straight to vinyl as is. But I may clean up a little bit of something, in the high end or something, just with a quick EQ before the final. But honestly, I'm trying to preserve the 2009-ness of it. Like, and that would probably be different if I had the actual original sessions, but I don't for some reason.
Damn,
I don't know what happened. I don't know. I think it had to do, I was using Pro Tools at the time. I think at some point I switched computers, and it was like slightly before iCloud was around. And I had thought that I had everything backed up, but it was only a certain, it was almost, I think there was something about I didn't have certain audio files synced. I don't know. At one point I gave up, like, I think it was probably three or 4 years after the album was done. I realized that they were completely gone, and I was just like, all right, that's it. I don't have them. So this is just how they are.
Digital house fire.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that was probably part of my thinking was, well, it's just things. Like, I don't care. Like, I have them. I have the final version, so that's better than nothing. So I think I was just like, maybe I could have done more work to try to recover them. But I think I was in this position of just keep moving forward and don't overthink the possessions, including digital possessions.
So tell me about maybe some of your favorite tracks on the album. I will tell you mine and why after that.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. For me, I think I look at every album, especially back then. I looked at every album I've made. I think every musician probably has a version of this, or every artist has a version of this, where you have your own little quirks about why you do the things you do. And for me, sequencing an album is like such a language that I speak for myself that only I understand, but it definitely overlaps with other artists who have created albums, such as, which tracks are supposed to be the strong ones and little anchor points as you journey through the sequence. And for me, it comes down to like the two strongest tracks for me, I knew were track 5 and track 12, which 5 is called Sprawling Certainty and 12 is A Void Does Not Exist. Those were kind of like the deep kind of, I don't know what to call them. Like, I wanted to say anchors, but I wanted something more like they're kind of the foundation of the house. Like, without those two, I feel like there wouldn't have been enough meat. So
interesting. It's a 14-track album. Well, bonus tracks.
Okay, well, I will say that those bonus tracks were only recently retconned back into the fold. I put them out. I think it was like I had them on Bandcamp. And then like the CD does not have them and the vinyl will not have them. But recently I added them to Spotify and I was like, you know what? They're part of the story too. They should be there. And they're labeled as bonus tracks even on the streaming services. Mm-hmm. So those were like, at one point I decided to cut those off and it instantly, the whole album got stronger to me. It was like, this is much more to the point. And little did I know that by cutting those off, I made them able to fit onto vinyl, but I didn't know that at the time because a CD could have all those tracks,
right? Timing
wise. So you get to about 42 or 43 minutes if you take off 13 and 14. So to me, 12 is the actual final track. And I should say this too. Track 5 and track 12, the ones I just mentioned, were both used on the Discovery Channel before this album was out. They were just demos. They were used on the Discovery Channel for the Discovery Channel tribute to Billy Mays. Nice. And so they paid me like royalties for it, and it was sort of like a favor. But it just so happened that the vibe of them fit perfectly for like as people are crying in interviews, like you put this underneath it, and it really elevates the whole thing. And so there were a lot of pitchmen. The show is called Pitchmen, the reality show. There were a lot of fans of it and of my dad that associated these songs, specifically those two songs, to that grief. And, not to discount it, but like, it's not the same grief I was feeling. Like they're feeling like a public figure kind of grief, which is still strong. But, what I mean to say is that it kind of became intertwined. So I think that there was something about that too, by the time it all came around to releasing it, that I knew that people had a connection to. And I still, to this day, have people talk about track 12 as like, that's the one.
You got to have an epic closer to an album, right?
Yeah. And for some reason it did. Like, and when I hear that song, I hate the drums on it. Like, but I recognize that there's something strong emotionally going on. And that's kind of how I feel about the whole album. I couldn't make it today because I'm not in that state of mind. But I also couldn't make a mix that bad today, if that makes sense.
You could try. You could give it your best shot.
Yeah. There's just so many things. Like, I don't know, not to get too in the weeds with the sonic aspect of it, but when I hear these drums, they're just so like, it's almost like I didn't have a concept of like letting some things just be dynamic. Like, as far as the mix, I know there's dynamics in these songs just by nature because they're quiet, loud type things. So anyway, to just finish this thought about my favorite songs, like I said, 5 and 12 are the strongest. But if I said my favorite, it would probably be tracks 1 and 2, Yield and A Cleansing Breath, were like such strong starters for me of, I know I have something. When I got those, I was like, the energy, it just like laid the groundwork. And I thought it was, at the time, I remember feeling like it was like a bold move to start more upbeat and then very quickly go down tempo. Like by track 3 and 4, you're slower and it kind of never really goes up again. And that was something that I thought made sense in the time. And I think it still does, but it's hard to put myself in my shoes at that time and really see what I was feeling, but I can remember the certainty that I had around some of these decisions. And I think maybe that was me stepping into just trust in my own taste and my own, because it was my world I was building. So I can do whatever I want.
That's the beautiful part of being a creative and an artist.
For sure.
So let me tell you my favorite song and
very
why. And it has nothing to do with any of the other reasons that you have listed here. It is unique to us. It is Sprawling Certainty. It is track 5. And now when we first connected, I was putting together the documentary, and
I knew you were going to say this now that you're saying it.
Yeah. And you were like, yeah, you can use these tracks. And I was going through and I'm like, yeah, this stuff is all good. There's a lot I could do with these things. And that song I put in to this moment where the voiceover is kind of talking about, the hopes and dreams of people in the late 19th century leading into the 20th century about the potential of life and their world and the commercial and industrial ventures and things, including, California and what that kind of symbolized at that point in time and what it, continues to represent to a degree, even till now. And it just created this great mood between both the imagery and the messaging. I have continued to make shorter cuts of that documentary or remade parts of it with AI, but I always try to recreate that moment with that song in each version of the film because it feels very comfortable, and it's something that I think like it allows you to just kind of like settle in to hopefully the message of that event and also the message of the film. So, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. And that actually comes to mind a lot because now the technology of distribution has come so far that there's a YouTube user generated content section on my distributor where I can kind of see all the people who have used tracks that have been identified, and it'll just link to the video right in my little dashboard here. And right now I'm on it, and you're the first one that comes up.
That's awesome.
1893 Chicago's Columbian Exposition, because it's kind of based on views. So within the last however many days, I think it's like the last week, of all the videos that are using my music, yours has the most views right now of the last week. So it does come up on my thing a lot.
Hey, nice. And I attribute it to the great soundtrack, you know?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, it's a great piece. And every time I throw it on and I usually end up sharing it again, just like in Discord or something. And I'm just like, yep, solid stuff.
That is the 4-minute cut of the documentary that I did for a contest. And, it was just, I just like the way that it feels, and I want people to feel that same way, regardless of how long or short the film is. So it's trying to dial in to that moment with that soundtrack, and I try to align the song to kind of have that same kind of crescendoing build over underneath of what's happening in the dialogue too. I have kind of gone to some lengths to make sure that that's present there.
That's awesome. I love that.
So let's hear about what you have been doing since Gently. Let's hear about, maybe new albums, live performances, where people have connected with you most interestingly over the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, it's crazy because Gently being like this starting off point of my actual career as a musician is kind of funny because it's so not like the rest of my career, down to the point of like, my first actual live shows didn't come until I believe 2 years after. I think 2011 was the first time I played live. And by that time I wasn't able to like recreate these songs. So I was just doing kind of experimental, improvised, ambient sets, I would say. It wasn't until now I remember on the 5-year, or no, on the, I think on the 5-year. Sorry, wait. Yeah, it was either maybe it was 3-year anniversary. I actually did assemble a little 3-piece to try to recreate some of these songs. And we practiced maybe 3 times and then did this show at a coffee shop. And there's a little video of it somewhere, but it didn't turn out that great, but it was still special to try to recreate. I think we did track 1, track 2, and like one other one. Like that was it. But so my thought had always been, if a lot of people were tapped into Gently when it came out, which they were for the reasons I said, my thought was I feel like I kind of betrayed anyone that was very into it because I kind of went a different direction. And it just seemed like I started to get really experimental pretty quick. Like maybe in 2010, I was starting to do like ambient drone, kind of just actual experimental, where it was like very, like unconventional music. And that was just what I got way into. I was kind of experimenting with, mushrooms and stuff like that at the time. So it became very far from Gently pretty quick. And I think there were a few people that even voiced that were like way into Gently at the time. And they were like, I don't like this stuff. Can you not do that?
Well, that's okay.
Yeah. And my answer was like, literally, I don't care. Like I did care, but it was more, I can't care. I think that's what it was. Like, I just can't. Like I'm on a journey here, and I can't get too caught up in what everyone wants. And I think that's everybody's creative journey in some way, as you kind of mentioned. But I would say it actually did kind of circle back and forth. Like there's even an album that I don't know if you're even aware of this. There's an album from 2015 that I released called Gladly, which is on the streaming services. And I always sort of looked at it as an unofficial follow-up to Gently. It doesn't quite go to the same places, but it's in the same vein, let's say. It was almost like I was trying to tap into all that And it was to varying degrees of success, but I think, I'm pretty proud of that one too. So if anybody wants to check that out. But yeah, nowadays I've come a long way, and I'm more of a live musician than I am even a recording musician at this point. And that's been for many years. And that's just how it ended up. I somehow discovered within 5 years of releasing Gently that, improvisation and live looping were all kind of what I'm most comfortable doing. Like I almost do better under no plan than I do with like an intense plan set. And I found that out pretty quick when I started playing shows. I knew that I'm better when it's just like, let's see what happens. And it took a long time to get there, but I would say maybe 10 years after Gently, I was in a place where my sets were really strong and everything kind of came together. As far as now, you can hear Gently and you can go see one of my shows, and you could probably understand how we got there. Like you could probably see that there's a line between Gently and the show you just heard, but that wasn't always the case. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love watching you online. I have played when you were broadcasting on Twitch. I've played it for a lot of people over the years.
Yeah, thanks.
There is a sonic thread between the early recording studio stuff and the live improvisational performance material. Do you think that creating a live set has a relationship to creating a playlist or a track order for an album? Do you look at them the same, or do you see them differently?
Yeah. No, that's a great thought and observation, because I definitely do. And it's different though, because when I improvise a set, I feel like I can't, it's not the same in that it's almost like it's almost like if you're going from track 3 to track 4, it's like in a set that I'm improvising, that just sort of happens. I can't really say what, I don't know. Like it's almost like when I listen to my sets back now, like I literally just played for the solstice on December 20th. And when I listen back to that set, I hear, even though none of it was consciously done, I hear the arc of an album basically. And it's like inescapable for me. I can't not think of it that way, or at least subconsciously think of it that way. So you're absolutely right, where it's like, that's a similar thing. It's just funny because those still though, I would approach the two things very differently, completely differently in a way, but it's almost like one is meant to be kind of just one's meant to happen. A live set is just meant to happen and be done. And the album is meant to be refined and dialed in. That's the real difference in the process.
So what can we expect from you besides the Gently LP vinyl in the near term or for the rest of 2025?
It's hard to say. I do think I'll be back to streaming pretty soon.
Fantastic.
After a bit of time away, I'm hoping. I am playing shows again. They're a little bit more sparse right now. They're mostly in the Atlanta area, or at least on the East Coast. The thing is, I'm at a point with my mixing and my composing where, for as long as I've been doing it, I've never felt very good at it. And I feel recently I did get like noticeably better at it. But the problem that has created is that I'm not as comfortable putting out mixes that aren't as good as I feel they can be. And I've never been a perfectionist at all, as you could probably see if you listen through my discography. But I have about 4 or 5 different Infinite Third releases conceptualized, and by that I mean there's album art, there's makeshift track lists, there's ideas about themes and Even the songs are sort of mapped out to some degree. And I feel so intimidated by trying to bring them to life that I'm just not. And it's kind of disappointing and sucks, but I'm also just not, I don't want to just push it out. I just want it to find its way out. So I would say that you can expect a new full length album, this is probably the longest span of my life I've ever gone without releasing a full length album, between two full length albums, actually. And I mean, I guess you're familiar with my Holy Noise album, my 9-hour album. I don't know if I quite consider that an album, of an actual album. It's more of a collection, a box set, if you will.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, there's a very strong album that I've envisioned for over 5 years called Transmute Death. That is like, it's such an entity in my life that it's almost like for me, it just already exists. So it's hard because I really want to put it out. I really want to make it and I really want to put it out, but there's part of me that only wants to do it to the highest degree possible. And I want to rent studio time and work with a producer or just do it to a different level. Maybe even with some live musicians besides myself. But so right now it's really hard for me to say what's next as far as recordings and release music. I know I'll keep playing shows and I'll keep hopefully streaming. But other than that, there's not much I can say about what's next in the discography.
Well, we'll get it when you feel like it's ready for us. That's perfectly fine. That's how it goes. It's not like you haven't been putting anything out.
True. Yeah. Well, for me, I've always been such a like a funnel of make something, put it out. Like almost like I'm trying to just make a record of my existence all the time. That it's really hard for me to not do that. So it's a bit of a tension, and I'm hoping that tension will inform the finished product eventually of the next thing, and you'll kind of feel that frustration in it because another reason is that I also plan for the next big thing that I put out to be heavy, maybe to a level that I've never gone with Infinite Third, but that's just where I'm at. I pretty much listen to heavy, like post metal, black metal, death metal. Like that's what I listen to daily. So
Gently's pretty Midwest post rock shoegaze type of stuff, right?
Totally. Yeah. And that was a very happy thing that happened for me. Was I was into post rock at the time, but I never thought I would make it. I was like, I loved Explosions in the Sky, Mogwai, stuff like that. And when Gently finally happened, it was almost like maybe that was part of it. It was like I was ingesting all this stuff like that, but I didn't have the language to make it. But something about like the necessity to have to make that sound meant like I had already done all the research possible on this kind of thing. So it kind of just came out like that. And so that's like my version of it. And you hear it in the guitar and the tremolo picking and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. Are there any points we haven't touched on yet that you feel are important to get across, or just ideas that you have a burning desire to relay?
You and I have talked offline about my other side project. Mm-hmm. That's sort of a weird. Is it a side? Is it me? Is it a side project? Like, what is it? It's called eyepillow, and I have one album under that name and a few prior releases, like EPs, under that. And this whole conversation of me being on the show basically came from me having an album done under that name, and we sort of pivoted to Gently because of the timeliness of it. And but I bring it up to say that that's another example of my like incessant, like I feel like I don't release anything, but if you look at my releases, including this side project since 2020, I'm extremely prolific.
Yeah, for sure.
To me, I'm stagnant right now. And this is coming from someone that
put out a 9-hour collection of music.
Yes. And I don't know if you remember like 2012, like SoundCloud era kind of stuff. Like I had a SoundCloud at one point, and I did a thing called the Daily Drops. And it was I think it was May 1st, 2012 through May 1st, 2013. I released a song a day.
That's insane.
And some of them ended up being other songs on albums or demos or whatever. And there's no record of the whole thing anymore because at one point SoundCloud pivoted to making you pay to have unlimited storage. And I think at one point I was like, I'm not paying. And I was just kind of like offended by the idea. And so that's gone. Like you can go to SoundCloud and you'll find the final Daily Drop. I think it's May 1st, 2013. That's like what it's called. And that was a crazy project because I had my friend making visual art for every day. And so we did this, and I don't know if you ever heard of, or if you participate in like the morning pages. Have you ever heard of that?
Not sure.
Like morning pages, which is just kind of journaling first thing in the morning. Just
okay. Then no.
Stream of consciousness. It comes from the book The Artist's Way, which is sort of a staple kind of creativity book. That's a kind of you can follow like a 12-week program kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, the part of it that sticks with everyone is the morning pages, and I've done it before for many weeks at a time, where you really feel like something opens up when you're waking up and doing that every day, where like you're more in touch with your emotions, and just you can speak more freely. And I felt like that's what that did for music for me, was making myself do that every day for a year in some way led to being able to improvise for 3 or 4 hours at a time and only be getting started. Like it opened up this idea that there's always more to pull from. There's always that you're not going to run out of ideas, and you're not going to run out of creative energy. It's just not how it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's not how it is at all. Yeah. There's just an infinite reservoir of concepts and ways to invert them and explore that space. Yeah. I don't believe that people have a limited capacity to be creative.
Yeah. And I think that even probably since that time, I would say like I've not been able to relate to the concept of writer's block. And I don't say that like arrogantly. I just mean that it's become such second nature that I know that I can at least I could draw a circle on a paper, and like that will be a creative outlet. Like whatever I do, I just know I can do it. I may have writer's block maybe around this album that I'm talking about, but to me, the concept of I'm like the muse isn't talking to me right now is just kind of a matter of, am I just not tapping into it? And it's almost like the more you pull from the creative field, the more it gives you. You can't deplete it. It's just, you have to be actively asking to receive.
I would agree. Billy, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for taking the time.